Good morning. This is another Monday. Right now I'm actually doing this earlier than Monday, but I release them on Monday at 12:05 a.m. And sometimes I just like to carry a good camera with me, take pictures. And that's typically the pictures you see, like the one here with the red Camaro that I spotted at the intersection. That's what I used to take the picture. I got a Sony Alpha 6000 camera I carry around with me. And I can usually whip it out and snap a picture pretty quick because it's a mirrorless camera and it's really quick. And got a telephoto lens on it to get a good picture. Anyway, I also usually blank out the license plates. Some pictures I take with my cell phone, but this is going to be a presentation. I'm going to talk about variable cam timing a little bit. That's not the whole presentation. And one of you guys asked about variable Venturi carburetors. I'm going to talk about them a little bit, and I worked on those when I was at the Ford dealer. And there's some other stuff I'm going to talk about. So let's get into this thing. This is the resolver that I was talking about. I was at Craig Van Battenberg's Up Your Voltage 18 school in Massachusetts back in 2010. And he had some of those hybrid transmissions taken apart, and this is the resolver from one of those hybrid transaxle motors, traction motors. And that was the picture I had put last time in there. And this was actually I actually took photos of this, and we were horsing around with it. It's interesting how that little thing does. You know, you can look at that video again if you want to. I'm not going to play it a second time. This was me on my Explorer. Got my Zurich scan tool that I bought from Harbor Freight. They don't sell the Zurich anymore. They sell another brand called Icon over there, and I think the most expensive one you can get is like $1,700 over there. And it's pretty doggone functional. I've been able to do quite a bit with this scan tool. This one here, when I bought it, was on sale for like $900 or something like that. But it's got power balance. It works real smooth. And it's got a little kickstand thing you kick out the back, so it'll sit there, and it's got, the way it's designed, I'm able to hook it over that little package tray and just let it hang on my dash. Now, letting it hang on a steering wheel is a bad idea, because if the airbag goes off, it'll light your, take your head off. I like to put it over there, so I can drive it without having it in my hand, and I can just glance over there and see it whenever I'm seeing and on that particular time I was looking for a misfire that was one of those that misfire bites, that you're going about 45 miles an hour and you're going up a hill, and it goes bite, 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 bite. That's going to be an ignition issue with a plug or a coil or something like that. And well, I put a set of plugs in this one in a coil pack when I figured out which one it was. And I showed you a picture of the plug that was actually doing the coil pack I had replaced earlier, but one of the plugs had a little very faint carbon track on it, and actually on this particular round replacing the plug took care of it. Previously I had to replace a coil pack to fix it. This right here is the variable Venturi carburetor. I worked on these things at the dealer. Pretty interesting thing. It's not very complicated. Now, whenever you open the hood, if you've never seen one of these before, you're going to think, oh no, what am I going to do? The 2700 was not a feedback carburetor. There was no oxygen sensor there. The 7200 had this feedback stepper motor, and it basically just regulated airflow based on oxygen sensor input. That's not what I was going to talk about here. This diaphragm over here uses vacuum to pull the Venturi valve back, and this is a tapered rod, and the farther back it pulls it, as the air goes through there, more air can go through and more gas can come out, because the rod's tapered and it's pulling it out of here, see? So this actually creates the Venturi. That's what this shape is. The shape of this creates that Venturi. Now, the problem with this, and some of the police cars, that had the 5.8s, right up until 1991, police cars came with this carburetor and a 5.8. And so this cop came over here and he says, if I get this, it was a brand new one at the time, brand new vehicle. He said, I get behind some of these Toyotas running around here in the country, if they make a bunch of turns, I'm going to lose them. And the problem with that was, when you go all the way to the floor with the accelerator pedal, it had to depend on mechanical linkage to open this, because this diaphragm had no vacuum to draw on. See, so you're using you got no vacuum when this throttle plate's wide open. And so I could do some work with the, changing the, bending the stuff on the side of this thing. That diaphragm over here is right back here. We had to change those diaphragms a lot. They would bust and the thing wouldn't move them. And, that was a real common. It wasn't all that difficult to do. But one way or another, I would bend those links so this thing would have good wide open throttle, and so it would pull this all the way back and hold it back mechanically when they were wide open. And the guy told me later, the cop came back and he told me later that made a difference. He had his wide open throttle speed on that Crown Victoria was like 85 miles an hour before I did that. And after I adjusted these links and bent all this stuff so it would pull that all the way open and hold it open mechanically instead of depending on vacuum, he said it got him 140 miles an hour out of that thing, which he was able to catch the Toyotas that were making turns in the country like that. One way or another, those things were a lot of fun to work on. They, like I say, if you look at the cross section, they're just not complicated at all. It's a brilliantly simple design. The main weakness that they had was this silly thing here. Now the choke would basically, whenever it was cold, the choke would actually move these a little more. I mean, in other words, they would move a little more than they would just moved by the diaphragm. And that's how they got their cold enrichment and stuff like that. I could talk about that for a bit. This right here is your dash pot thing over here, or throttle kicker or something. I don't remember all that stuff. I've slept since then. One way or another, that's the variable Venturi. It's a pretty interesting little thing to horse around with. It's doing a whole lot better, so what we're going to do is we're going to back flush the heater core and see what we can do about getting it taken care of. This one here had a lot of crud and rust in it, and we were doing some flushing out and all this kind of thing. But this is the thing I was talking about with a clear hose. You hook a clear hose between the two heater hoses. You can buy this hose at Ace Hardware, and just stick it in there and fire it up. You can watch that coolant and see if the water pump's moving and all that. It's really a handy thing to do, and you used to do this a lot. When you're looking for one that's overheating and you're trying to figure out why, or you can basically take these hoses, and if you do it right, you can fire up the engine and keep a lot of water poured in it and flush a lot of rust out of the block this way. You don't want to spill any antifreeze on the ground, but one way or another, by the time you're doing the clear water flush and all that, you can just get out there on the concrete somewhere and let that rusty water flush out of there while you're keeping it filled up and all. That's just I'm not going to talk a lot about that, but that's the clear hose thing I was talking about. I've mentioned that in here a few times. Now I did a training class that was being held at a facility in Montgomery, and they got a cutaway version of an engine, of a Honda engine. And I was noticing as I was turning a little switch and the motor would come on, and that engine would turn through real slow, and you could watch everything work because it was a cutaway. It had a little bump riveted on the back of the camshaft that would bump the intake valve open just a little bit during the time, whenever you felt like it should have been closed. Well, some of the Tecumseh and Briggs and Stratton engines use that method, and it's still seen in modern designs where ease of starting is more important than squeezing out every ounce of power. Now, some of them have got a variable setup so that this bump goes away with the centrifugal mechanism, but the lower cost engines would typically have the one that was just fixed on that. And it's small enough not to affect performance once the engine's running. But it made it easier to start. You know how these Hondas, whenever usually you pull it and it starts first time? Well, some of the other engines started using that too. I don't know who used it first. Probably Honda may have been the one that used it first, because the little Honda small engines run real smooth. Now this is normal intake valve timing. This is variable valve timing we're talking about here now. Normal intake valve timing, and it's going to vary based on duration and lift and all that hogwash and everything. This right here, your duration will change this angle right here. But this is a sort of a generic way that you're going to be looking. The valve timing is going to open, this is your top dead center right here. Excuse me, I gotta get my little laser. This is going to be your top dead center right here. And this is bottom dead center. And this is crankshaft now, not camshaft. So, because the crankshaft's the most important part of when you're looking at when the valve's open. Alright, so typically they're going to open slightly before, and I told you about the overlap, how intake valve opens right before it gets to top dead center, while the exhaust valve is still open a little bit. Piston's right at the very top, not a lot of space in there. It pushes what's left of the exhaust gas out of there, right? That gets a nice clean burn for the next cycle. So it opens right before top dead center, and then they close right about here, you know, like 50, 60 degrees after bottom dead center. All right, now that's intake valves. All right, now advanced valve timing. Now you might notice on these right here, unless you have variable valve duration or whatever, you're going to have, this angle is going to be the same. It just changes. See, it's indexed over here a little bit so that it opens sooner. See that? And closes a little bit later, right? I mean, I'm sorry, excuse me, opens sooner and closes sooner too. So that's what you, this is on a 3.9 liter 4 valve, you know, basically. And this is your retarded intake valve time, and that's what it looks like. See that? That's what that, it opens way over here after the fact. Now, if you look at both camshafts are variable, the cruise exhaust valve will close late. When you're cruising, our exhaust valve closes late, that leaves some of the exhaust gas in there to take care of your NOx. That way you don't need EGR. Default timing is at idle. It just lets the thing, you know, the springs have the little actuators locked where they ordinarily would be. And on acceleration, the intake valve opens early. That gives you a little bit more oomph. There was a Mustang one time that my buddy was working on, and he said that when they put it back together, well, he was actually helping with it. When they put it back together, the fuel trims were at 10 plus on one side. It was on a Mustang, and it was 10 minus on the other side. And this one went 4.6. And so they got to investigating that, and they said, he said it really ran interestingly well. But what they had done was they had one of the teeth on the camshaft was one tooth advanced, and that was causing the fuel trims to be, you know, separated 10, you know, 20 degrees, like 10 minus and 10 plus and all that kind of thing. I thought that was interesting. He said, you know, I was wondering what would happen if you advanced both camshafts one tooth. What would that do to the fuel trim, and what would it do to the performance, you know? There's always little things going on. Now this right here is a 2012 Mustang Coyote engine that I'm showing here, because it's got this variable valve timing on both camshafts and all. But anyway, that's a little discussion of variable valve timing. Let's move on. What do these vehicles all have in common? You can tell them I've been snapping a lot of pictures while I'm out there in traffic. I always thought this was a permanent interesting. I was at the bank whenever I saw this, and this person here, I changed these license plate numbers so you won't be able to read them. This person right here, I guess they had to, I don't know if they were taping this to keep the trunk closed. I wonder sometimes when I see tape, why did they tape this, you know? Or to hold the tail lights in? I don't know, but that one's got a burned out light like all the rest of them on that thing. I thought that was kind of interesting there. This was my brother's 71 Thunderbird. Had the standard 429 Thunderjet, had 360 horsepower. A higher performance version on this particular one. Not all the 429s were like this. They detuned them. Some of these things, they didn't have near this much horsepower. This one here, my brother's Thunderbird, and this is an actual photo of his Thunderbird, had a 429 in it with a 375 horsepower. That thing was a stud. But it was just like a brand new car when he bought it for $1,700, and this was ages ago, back in the 80s, you know. And that car was the most interesting thing. I had to pull the engine largely apart because of this timing some of the plastic came off the timing chain, got in the oil pump, stopped the oil pump from turning, stopped the camshaft from turning, busted the gear on the camshaft and on the distributor. So he called me and he said, hey, I was on my way back to over here to the home, and it just quit running. So I dragged it back to my dad's shop over there, and I jacked it up, and I pulled the valve covers in the front, and pulled the radiator shroud off of it, and found out what was wrong with it because the distributor wasn't turning and all that. So I had to put a camshaft in it, which means you got to pull the valve covers, the intake, all the rocker arms, the push rods. You got to get the lifters out of there. Found a camshaft at a salvage yard, popped that in there, and along with a distributor that I bought from the same salvage yard, and got all that set up. I had to pull the pan off of it and get the junk out of the. Now I didn't even replace the oil pump. I just took the oil pump apart and got the crap out of it, put new timing chain on it, and got all it done. But what impressed me about that, and this engine had never been taken apart, not a single time. You could tell because the cork gasket still had the blue Ford paint on them, on the oil pan and on the valve covers. But this was the cleanest engine on the inside that I think I had ever seen on a car with this many miles on it. And it had over 100,000 miles on it. Something else this guy did on the C6 transmission that was in this thing. I've serviced the transmission one time. This guy had taken the old Ford C6 and C4 transmissions had a metal screen, kind of like some of your Nissans have now. This thing, he had modified the filter and put a Chrysler, one of those real fine fiber Chrysler filters on it, and so that the filter would be better than the filter that was there. He didn't like that screen. He wanted one of those Chrysler filters on it with little 3 screws, the little square one. And it would totally amaze me. I don't know who had this car or who had tinkered with it, but they really were sharp about what they were doing. And the fact that it was so clean on the inside of that motor, I'm talking about, there was not a bit of sludge anywhere, and there wasn't even a lot of varnish in there. And I never just boggled my mind at how this thing was. That was a fine automobile, and my brother sold it. After he had it for a couple of 3 years, he decided to get rid of it. He traded cars a lot. Now this was a car that's my son driving it, and I took a snapshot whenever he was driving next to me down the road. I just threw my little point and shoot camera and popped a shot of it, and managed to get a pretty good one. And this was an 86 little LTD, and this guy that worked at a parts house had bought it, and it wouldn't run worth a flip. And he had replaced just about everything he could replace from the parts store on the engine, and idle, speed control, all kinds of junk. Still wouldn't run right. So my wife knew his wife, and she sent me to see him, and he sold me this car for $500. Okay, so I took it home, looked at it a little bit, figured out the catalytic converter was clogged up, and after I dealt with that problem, the way you do on an old car like that in a state that doesn't have emission controls, and I'm just this is 20 years ago. I drove the thing to work and back. I put a different radio in it. It rode and drove real good. It had a C5 transmission in it. My son, I decided to let him drive it. It burned a lot of gas. He didn't really like the car that much, but it was a good running car, a clean car. And after I cleared up that clogged catalytic converter issue, he drove it to work and back. Now, when he was driving it on a 30-mile trip, sometimes it would start boiling the transmission fluid, and you'd see a bunch of fluid coming out the back. And typically, what you got to do in a situation like that is either put an external transmission cooler on it, because the transmission cooler in the radiator will be, have silt all around it or something like that, or replace the radiator is a smarter thing to do, and put a modulator valve on it. And once I did that, it took care of it. But anyway, the other end of that story is, there was a guy in my automotive program, because I was teaching by this time, and I said, I was going to sell the car, and he said, what do you want for it? And I said, $850. Well, see, that would be a $350 profit, because I hadn't really spent any money on the car. And we've driven it for a while. Now we did put that external radiator cooler on it, but that didn't cost a lot, you know, at the time. So anyway, this guy, he was older than me, and he was real slick, and he liked to, you know, try to Jew somebody down. Seemed like I was wanting $8.75 for it. Anyway, he kept trying to Jew me down to $7.50, and I said, no, I'm not interested. I'm not that interested in selling it. And so finally, he came in there and he goes, I've never come up to anybody else's price in my whole life, but I'm going to give you what you're asking for this car. So he gave me that. Well, he kept it for about 2 weeks, and he sold it. I said, what did you get for it? He didn't want to tell me. I said, come on, you know. I said, I'm not going to, it doesn't going to bother me one way or another. He sold that thing for nearly $2,000. He made a good profit off of it. But I told him, I said, don't bother me. I said, I made what I wanted to off of it. I don't care what you made off of it. Because he was afraid I'd get mad, see, because he sold it for so much more than he paid me for it. But that's okay. Whatever. That was an interesting little story about that one. I put this one time, a long time ago. I had to teach my students, whenever you're trying to, you know, pop this tie rod in and out, you don't hit it like this so that the force is going into the rack, because that messes up the rack. What you're supposed to do is hit it from this direction, and that way you don't screw up the rack. And I actually had one of my students that wasn't thinking clearly that did this and messed up a rack, and we had to replace the rack on a vehicle because they hit it going the wrong way. You know, and that rack won't take a lot of banging on it if you're hitting it with a hammer. You know, some of these things you got to whack them a few times before they'll jump out of there. Cleaning the throttle body. I've mentioned this before. Keep your fingers out of the throttle body. If you open the throttle body by hand, you're liable to mess it up. My buddy Donnie did that. Opened the throttle body by hand with the key switched off to clean it. It was on some Asian make, I can't remember. And it destroyed the throttle body, and he had to put a throttle body on it at his own expense because he does a shop over there. So anyway, the whole thing is, what I used to tell, have somebody switch on the key, hold the gas pedal all the way to the floor with their foot while you're cleaning the throttle body using your throttle body cleaner and all that. But use a toothbrush, not your fingers. Keep your fingers out of that darn thing, because this motor not only drives this thing open, it drives it closed. That spring is not what closes that. This motor will drive it both ways, and it can cut your finger off. So keep your finger out of the throttle body. Don't open it by hand if you can help it. You may get away with this more than you think, and then on one day you get bit, you know, so just don't go there. One way or another, that's all I'm going to say about those cleaning throttle bodies. Have somebody hold it open, clean it out real good. You know, even push your toothbrush in there, push your rag around to get it all cleaned out good. But don't put your fingers in a throttle body or open it by hand. Just don't do that. That's my word to the wise right there. Now, we talked about this a little bit. If you're going to check and see why this ground, you know, if this has got a good ground, you're not going to be able to do it. You can check voltage drop, you know, but let's say that you're going to, your motor pulls 5 amps while working. Motor won't run, but power is there. You want to check voltage drop. What you need to do is you need to find, to check this ground, something that pulls about as much current as the motor if you want to do this right. This pulls almost no current. This pulls almost no current if you're measuring amps with it, you know. And this particular one, these headlight bulbs, they pull about the same amount as this 5 amp motor. So this is a good way to measure that. I like to take this headlight bulb and put it in a plastic, you know, cut the jar lid out, put it in a plastic jar so that it doesn't burn you and you're not touching the bulb, all that kind of stuff. And then you can just hook it up in series with that motor, turn it on, and if that light, you know, doesn't come on, you don't have a ground. Anyway, you know, the instructors in these schools and all will say, never use a test light, blah blah blah, you'll burn up in the computer. Well, I never used a test light for 20 years on computers, never burnt nothing up. So go there. What do you see about this Tesla? What do you notice? Look at this Tesla for a minute. Tell me what you notice about it. Study this picture. I'm going to give you a minute. I noticed this. I saw it parked. I happened to park behind it and instantly noticed something that bothered me. Look at the camber on that tire. That negative camber. Isn't that something? Now, I don't see a lot of wear on this tire yet, but doing an alignment on a Tesla is really stringent because you got to put weights in the car that are exactly the right weight so that you can get the alignment just right. I did a I wrote a training course for Cars on Demand on basic Tesla service, and that's one of the things I learned when I was putting that course together, is you have to put the exact amount of weight in both seats and all this, whenever you're doing your alignment, so that everything will be just right and all that. But somebody needs to do an alignment on this one here, because that's terrible right there. I don't know what we'd do if we didn't have tape. Tape is just really useful for all kinds of things. Now, why this car is taped up with the hood even taped shut just totally amazed me. I saw this in the parking lot. And it also got some, this may be one of them things like you see on the clickbait. Always hang a bag on your door handle whenever you're parked in a parking lot so you can see if somebody's messing with you. Well, I got all this taped up. Now, what we used to do sometimes when we were trying to see where wind noise was coming from, we would put masking tape over all the trim and everything just to see if a rattle or something or whistling noise went away. But my goodness, somebody did some heavy duty tape, and they were really slick about using tape that was white. It was the same color as the car. That was cool. Now this one here, this guy had his back window down, and it's taped up in here in the front. I saw this one at the grocery store parked out there one day, and so they had some tape. They went ahead and used the gray tape on this. Now, if you want some really good duct tape, the Gorilla brand duct tape is about as good as any I've ever seen. That is some tough stuff there. You can buy it at a grocery store. This square body Chevy truck was officially ruined. Now, it's everybody's own business what they do to a vehicle that they own, but I always hate to see somebody take a pickup truck from the 60s or 70s and lower it like this. Now, I have seen other ones that were ruined worse than this one, but when I saw this, I said, that's that guy's business. That's his truck, and no use for me judging him for it. But if I had a square body Chevy truck and I was going to fix it up, I would not do this with it. Now, that may get him a little bit better fuel economy, and he obviously doesn't have a whole lot of ground clearance. It's not ridiculously low so that he can't go over a speed bump, I don't know if it rides better or how it drives. Probably handles good in corners better, and it's less likely to turn over. There's pluses and minuses about that. But anyway, I had put zeros on here. I saw a Corvette one time that actually had zeros all the way across on the license number. Boggled my mind. I must have special ordered that. Now, this right here was a 2006 Sonata trainer vehicle, sitting out in the sun. And that doggone thing, whenever we were getting ready to go into class, it was real, real hot at this time of year, June. And they came and they came out of the other building, and that car was, backed in over there. And they said, the back glass on that Sonata looks strange. It looks odd. It's smoky looking or something. I said, really? They said, yeah. When I went out there to look at it, it wasn't smoky looking anymore, but the heat had caused this back glass to explode. And that was something that there was a rash of that down here in the deep south back in the 60s and 70s of cars having the back glass busting because of the heat buildup in the car and all that. That may have had something to do with Chevrolet and GM doing their astro ventilation. I don't know, really, to tell you the truth, but I do know this one here shattered just because of the heat. Nobody broke it. It broke all by itself. I called Glass Doctor, and they priced it out for $350, and this has the rear window defrost in it and all that. And so I said, well, that's not too terribly bad for that. So they came over there, they put that back glass in that car, and when they handed me the invoice, it was only $200. It boggled my mind that I had okayed them a $350, and they only charged $200, which was a sweet deal. Who does that? And I thought, man, I'm sold on these people. If I ever need another glass, I'm going to use Glass Doctor, All right, here's another story. We're coming up on 30 minutes here. I'm going to go a little over 30. This Escalade started running rough. It belonged to a guy that had been one of my students. This guy right here was also, this is Jonathan, he had been one of my students. I graduated from my program. The dealer replaced all the injectors for big money because he took it over first. It didn't even start all that good. He called me and I said, you don't need to put an engine in that car. That's ridiculous. He said, well, I owe a bunch of money on it too. And I said, well, you know, take it somewhere else. So he took it to another shop. They replaced the O2 sensors and the catalytic converter, but it still wasn't fixed. Really? So he asked me what to do. I said, take it to Jonathan's shop. And this is Jonathan's shop from the air, right here. And Jonathan sent me this picture that somebody took a picture with a drone. And so Jonathan did a compression test and found a broken valve spring. This is the inside of Jonathan's shop. The broken valve spring was all that was wrong with it. And I think he, for all of the work that he did, I think he charged Zach something like $500. But see, it would have been fixed if the dealer had been allowed to put an engine in it. But did it need an engine? This is just totally astonishing to me, you know, because replacing a valve spring is not really all that much trouble. But they didn't apparently even know that it had a busted valve spring. Well, we were working back when this guy here was only 19 when this picture was taken. He opened his own shop, and he's got so much work he can't hardly get it all done now, and he's got 2 or 3 people working for him. He was a serious success story. I had a lot of guys that went through my program and graduated and really took it to the Super Bowl, and this guy was one of them. He's sharp as a tack. We were working on a 4.8 one time in a Silverado. The guy that was driving it was one of the, you know, directors at the college. He said, this doesn't have as much power as it used to have. And I drove it, and I didn't feel anything wrong with it, really. And I said, I don't know, this is a 4. I'm not used to this vehicle, but it seems to me like it runs about like you'd expect to have a 4.8 to run. Pulled it in there. Jonathan said, something's not right under that passenger side valve cover. And I said, really? And I, you know, quite frankly, I didn't hear anything. I said, well, let's just have a look. So we pulled the valve cover off, set a dial indicator up, checked the valve lift. Supposed to have like 240 thousandths valve lift, and one of those cylinders only had like 200 thousandths, so it had a worn camshaft lobe. And he picked up on that just listening to it. Now, I didn't hear it. It wasn't anything you could just, you know, but he could every now and then hear a little something going tick, 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 tick. And it didn't tick, tick all the time. It was just tick, ticking some of the time as the lifter was trying to take up that extra juice. Anyway, this guy will always impress me. And whenever some guys were beating on something with a hammer, you know, he'd say, and it wouldn't move. He'd say, let me see that hammer. And boy, he could smack something with a hammer and make it go. He's sharp as a tack. And I like to send him business because if nobody else can figure it out, if it's a basic engine problem, he can figure it out. And that's what happened with that Cadillac. This was Frank. Frank was a Desert Storm veteran. He was 51 years old whenever we went through my automotive program. And he was standing in front of the Mercury Sable trainer car, 3-liter in it, plain old Vulcan 3-liter. And I told this guy, I said, get in there and hold it up on, I had the smoke machine hooked up and all. I said, hold it up on about 1500 RPM. We're going to watch the oxygen sensors and we're going to make a vacuum leak and see what goes on. So to him, going to 1500 means going all the way to the floor and coming back. Well, this old car, that the engine was really old, and yeah, it had rev limiter on it and all that kind of stuff, but when he went to the floor, the gas pedal stuck under the floor mat and it threw a rod. It sounded like a bomb going off right there in the dadgum shop. Frank was standing in front of it with PTSD from Desert Storm. He liked to have jumped over a workbench. And now this was later on whenever they had pulled the engine out and there was, you know, we got another 3-liter engine and we basically cobbled together some parts from some other engines we had. And he was on in the cylinders, and Frank was saying, put on these safety glasses, you know, because I was always after him to wear safety glasses. And, you know, this was, you know, Frank kind of looked like Samuel L. Jackson. But Frank is still working at a shop here in town because I know his pickup truck. He's got a little black pickup. And I see that pickup parked out there by that shop every time I go by there. And he's been working at that shop, I'm going to say right now, for 10 years. He's one of that guy's main dudes. He's a fine fella. I always liked him. This truck right here was parked. This was a 2001 model or so Chevy It was parked there in something like 2004 and never was driven again. I always wonder about this kind of thing. But when it was parked there, I noticed it because it was a pretty blue truck. But it kept sitting there and sitting there and sitting there, and for 20 years, that truck, or 25 years or something, that truck's been sitting there. It's been sitting there a long time. Not 25 years, 20 years or something like that. It's boggled my mind. Well, that's the end of the story this time. We've been here 35 minutes. I hope you guys hung on till the end. Leave me a comment. Tell me what you thought about this, and I'll see you guys next week.